The Invisible Man. One day, not long after I had started working for him, Mangiarotti said, "That's enough work for today. Clear up, will you? I'll be back in 10 minutes. It was typical of him to spring surprises on people, to do things without warning or explanation. I cleaned the paintbrushes carefully, knowing that Mangiarotti would make a fuss if even one tiny speck of paint remained on them. I wasn't scared of him exactly, but he was a man with a sharp tongue, and I tried not to upset him. I packed everything away in the proper Mangiarotti order, ladders on the left, buckets on the right, and so on. After about quarter of an hour, a car pulled up, and there was Mangiarotti at the steering wheel of an old black Citroën. His face was gloomy as usual. "Get in," he said. The car pulled away quickly with a squeal of tires before I'd hardly had a chance to close the door. "Where are we going?" I asked. He did not reply, which was his way of telling me to mind my own business. I decided to settle back and enjoy what I could of the ride. After all, it was better than standing on a ladder painting shop fronts. I hadn't the slightest idea where we were going, but we were soon out of Paris and in open countryside. With typical suddenness, Mangiarotti screeched to a stop by the roadside and switched off the engine. I looked at him. He was staring straight ahead. I followed his gaze, but all I could see was a country road with a hedge running alongside it. A movement on the grass verge caught my eye. It was a hat, an old black Homburg, the sort that businessmen used to wear, and it appeared to be alive. It moved forward, stopped, disappeared, bobbed up again for a second, then moved forward and disappeared again. It was such a ridiculous sight that I burst out laughing, but Mangiarotti, who was also watching the hat, remained serious-faced. As I turned again to look, it rose up a couple of inches, revealing that there was a head underneath. It dawned on me that there was a ditch between the grass verge and the hedge, and that the wearer of the hat was down in the ditch. Mangiarotti got out of the car and walked towards the mysterious hat. I didn't know whether I was supposed to follow him or to stay in the car. My curiosity got the better of me, so I got out and hurried to catch up with him. He stood by the roadside, staring down at the hat and talking brusquely to it in an Italian dialect which I could not understand. I looked down too, and saw under the hat the red, wrinkled face of an old man. Despite the hot summer's afternoon, he was wearing a black, fur-collared overcoat, which perfectly matched his ancient Homburg. The amazing thing was that, although he was standing upright, his head barely cleared the top of the ditch. He was a dwarf of a man, and his small stature was exaggerated by the bent body of old age. Mangiarotti held out his hand to the old man and pulled him out of the ditch, lifting him momentarily off his feet as if he were a straw doll. I could see now that the old man was not much more than a metre tall. He was clutching a huge briefcase under his arm, which made him seem even smaller. Like his hat and his overcoat, the briefcase was black, and also, like them, had seen better days. I wondered who on earth he was, and what on earth he had been doing in the ditch. Mangiarotti typically gave me no explanation, and indeed did not even introduce me to the old man. The latter tapped the side of his nose and winked at me a couple of times as we walked back to the car, as if he and I shared a secret. Mangiarotti was holding him by the arm, but not affectionately. It was more like the grip that policemen use when they are arresting a wrongdoer. He bundled the little fellow into the back of the car and nodded to me to get in. We drove off with the usual squeal of tires. The old man was silent at first. Then he spoke to me. "Allora, giovanotto." "Well, young man," he said, addressing me in good Italian. I waited for the rest of the sentence, but nothing came, so I turned round to look at him. Once more, he winked at me and tapped the side of his nose with his bony forefinger. "So, giovanotto, what do you think?" Before I could think of a suitable reply to this baffling question, Mangiarotti uttered a short, "Sta zitto, buffone! Shut up, you old fool!" to the old man. The old man stuck out his tongue at the back of Mangiarotti's head. Then he patted his briefcase, continuing to smile and wink and tap his nose. The expression on his face suggested that he had the crown jewels in there. For a moment the thought crossed my mind that he might indeed be some kind of criminal, a burglar perhaps. With his small stature, he could easily climb in and out of windows, and he looked very fit and agile despite his years. Perhaps his briefcase was stuffed with stolen goods. We arrived back at Mangiarotti's flat in the Rue Blanche towards dusk. He dropped me and the old man off while he went to park the car. The old man seemed quite agitated, a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Who are you?" he asked me suddenly. It was a fair question, I suppose, the same question that I was dying to ask him. "I work for Signor Mangiarotti." He laughed out loud. "Signor Mangiarotti! Signor Mangiarotti!" he shouted. "That he is no Signor! He is a—" I did not know the words he used, but their meaning was clear. He had a very low opinion of my employer. "But don't you worry, Giovanotto. I'll be ready soon, and then I'll show Signor Mangiarotti a thing or two. I'll be rid of him forever." He patted his briefcase again and gave a little jump, the sort of spring that you associate with elves or fairies. He was for all the world like an elf at that moment, a tiny being full of magic and mischief. I decided that I liked him, even though I was quite sure that he was as mad as a hatter. "I'll show you later," he whispered when he's not around. "Our secret, Giovanotto. Va bene? Okay?" He winked and tapped the side of his nose again. "Va bene," I replied, humouring him. Mangiarotti returned a moment later, his face blacker than ever, probably because he had had difficulty in finding a parking space. We all went up to the flat, Mangiarotti pushing the old roughly ahead of him up the stairs. The old man took off his coat and hat and came to sit at the table where Mangiarotti had placed an open bottle of red wine and 3 glasses. The old man refused to let go of the briefcase, but held it carefully on his lap. He and Mangiarotti talked for a while in their thick dialect, ignoring me completely. As they talked, the tone of Mangiarotti's voice softened, and I could tell from the way he looked at the wrinkled little man opposite him that, deep down, he was really fond of him. Mangiarotti's problem was that he did not allow himself to show it. My theory was that the old man was a relative of some kind, an uncle, perhaps. It came as something of a shock to me, therefore, when the old man said to me, while Mangiarotti was in the kitchen preparing some pasta for our dinner, "Do you know, Giovanotto, I can't stand my son's cooking. He cannot even boil an egg, the idiot, let alone pasta." "Your son? Signor Mangiarotti's your son?" The old man shrugged his shoulders as if to say that it was a matter over which he had no control, an unfortunate accident of nature. "Now, if you want to taste really good pasta, you should let me cook for you sometime. I would cook you a dish full of tastes and flavours that you would never forget. What does that idiot son of mine know about herbs and flavourings? All he knows is garlic and tomato paste. But me." At this point, he tapped the side of his nose again and nodded towards the briefcase on his lap. "Shh," he whispered. "Not a word." I stared at him blankly and then decided to nod in smiling agreement. A dim memory from my childhood warned me that it was not wise to displease an elf. Mangiarotti came in then and plonked the food down on the table. It was not bad, but it wasn't very tasty either. The old man was right. It could have done with more flavour, the flavour that comes from adding just the right amount and combination of herbs. We finished off the bottle and started on a second. They say that wine loosens the tongue, but conversation did not get any easier, and I was quite relieved when Mangiarotti announced that he was going out to the shop to get some more wine. As he was leaving, he turned to me and said, in English so that his father would not understand, "Take no notice of that old fool. His head is full of nonsense. In fact, if I were you, I wouldn't even bother to talk to him." It was a cruel thing to say about your own father, I thought. As soon as he had left the room, the old man turned to me again. "So what do you think, Giovanotto?" The same unanswerable question, but this time I was ready for it. "Not bad," I replied, wondering if it was the answer he wanted. "Not bad, not bad? What a miserable expression! Pah! That's the sort of mean little thing that he would say," he said, nodding towards the door through which Mangiarotti had gone a minute before. "No, Giovanotto, it is not merely not bad. It is marvellous." "Marvellous, that's the word." He picked up his glass and emptied it in a single swallow. I refilled it for him and at the same time echoed the word, "Marvellous. Yes, you're right. It's marvellous." This seemed to satisfy him. His eyes narrowed and he beckoned to me to lean forward. He began to talk in an urgent whisper, despite the fact that there were only the two of us in the room. "It's the perfect crime, don't you think?" he said. "Well, yes," I replied. Yes, Giovanotto, I'm going to be rich, rich. How exactly? I began, but he was not to be interrupted. Just think! The biggest bank in Paris, and I shall rob it. You mean? But no question was necessary. Nothing would stop him now from telling me. His eyes shone with excitement. Yes, dear boy, I shall simply walk in, fill my briefcase with money and walk out again, he said. He sat back, his wrinkled elfin face radiating self-confidence. I was certain now that he was completely off his head. But won't somebody try to stop you? I asked as gently as I could. Ah, that's the beauty of it, my simple young friend. That's the beauty of it. I shall be invisible. The last 4 words came out like a banner headline. He looked anxiously towards the door before continuing. Look, he said. He opened his briefcase and allowed me to peer in. It was stuffed with what looked to me like dead plants, leaves and blades of grass. Herbs, Giovanotto, herbs. That's the secret. I have perfected a formula to make myself invisible. What do you think of that? Very marvellous, I replied encouragingly. He was mad, but I hoped that he was harmless. His eyes were fierce with enthusiasm and pride at that moment. He repeated the word marvellous to himself, and then, to my astonishment, slumped back in his chair. Suddenly his eyes lost their brightness. His face took on an expression of deep misery, and his body seemed to shrink even more, like a punctured balloon. What's the matter? I asked gently, thinking he might be ill from too much wine. I swear I saw tears in his eyes as he replied in a tiny voice, I can make myself invisible, but I don't know how to make my briefcase invisible. It was very difficult for me to keep a straight face, and I was very glad to hear the sound of Mangiarotti returning with the wine. As soon as he came into the room, he sensed the atmosphere. He spoke to me in English, which must have made the old man fear that I might say something about his secret plans. What were you talking about? What has that old fool been telling you? Mangiarotti asked suspiciously. I hate lying, but I did not want to let the old man down, so I just said, herbs. He's been telling me about herbs. What about herbs? About their uses. Said Mangiarotti, reassured. Well, he should know about herbs. He was once the head chef in one of the best hotels in Rome. The trouble is, he won't accept that he is just a useless old man now. Mangiarotti paused to look at his father, who was sitting very, very quietly, as if he were indeed trying to make himself invisible. Then he added, bitterly, You watch. As soon as my back is turned, the old fool will be off again to that damned ditch collecting herbs. I'm the one who has to go and fetch him back every time. He's just a bloody nuisance to himself and to everyone else. Mangiarotti went into the kitchen to fetch the corkscrew. The old man looked across to me, his eyes silently asking me if his secret was still safe. What else could I do? I winked at him and tapped the side of my nose. The elfin smile that spread across his face at that moment was a picture.